Okay, good afternoon, good evening. It's time for our Torah Tuesday class. It's Tuesday, what did they say, July 21st, 5 o'clock here in Arizona. I'm sorry I wasn't here last week. John did a good job, and I was busy moving. Our family moved last week, but I'm back. Let me open with a word of prayer. Father God, thank you. Thank you for your Torah. Thanks for people that are interested in your Torah enough to discuss it, to sit and read it and ask questions about it and learn from it and try to figure out how you want us to live, the things that are important to you and why they should be important to us. And I just pray that you'd bless us as we go through this time and be with us for our discussion and help all of us, each of us, to go away with a little better understanding of who you are and how much you love us and how you'd like us to behave. In Yeshua's name, amen. So we're going through the book of Genesis. We're on our own timeline because we wanted to just be able to spend as long as we needed to spend on the various different passages. So last week, you covered chapter 18 in Genesis, which in most Bibles has got a heading called Abraham's Three Visitors. That was a very interesting passage, I've always thought, because of the whole scenario of having these three visitors who Abraham obviously thought of as special somehow, as he ran to greet them and had them sit down and washed their feet and gave them a nice meal and everything. And as the story progresses, you find out that these three visitors would appear to be God in some sort of bodily form and two others. And I was struck about how nicely that fits with this concept of the divine council that we've been talking about since the beginning. The divine council are the angels, for the lack of a better word, that God has created to help him administer his creation, his universe. And so it would appear, this is my opinion, it would appear that God and two of his divine counselors came to speak to Abraham. Anyway, thought that was kind of interesting. John, there you go.
In your study of church history, do they use these verses as a Trinity-type argument or not?
Well, I have heard that.
Okay.
But I don't know. There's enough. This is one of several, right? This is one of several different instances where you have God in some sort of bodily form, along with others that were with him, and the numbers vary. They're not always one or even two or three. Sometimes the numbers are different, so it's hard to know. But that could be. Have you an opinion?
No, I'm just
curious.
I'm not much on getting into abstract theologies when it's not necessary. And, what you ought to be doing is figuring out what's required of us to do and do it.
Yep.
And so this kind of lends itself to those who wanted to make that argument. It's not something I want to make or focus on.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if you knew something more about it.
No, I don't know any more than this. Just anytime you see three things, a lot of times people like to assign them the members of the Trinity. It could be. But the thing that was interesting to me about this is of the three visitors, after we got through with them having their meal and announcing that Sarah was going to give birth, they go out to the hill. This is one of the reasons I got the map here. They go out, Abraham is seeing them on their way, and they would have, let's see, this thing took place more than likely in Hebron, which is right near here. And by seeing them on their way, he could have walked up to this big ridge of hills right here, which is on the west side of the Jordan or of the Dead Sea. And at the south end of the Dead Sea, down here, is where Sodom and Gomorrah more than likely were. And they could literally see from there down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so that's where they had this discussion. And it says 2 of the 3 walked on down the hill toward Sodom and Gomorrah, while the third, which the text says was the Lord, stayed and had this negotiating segment with Abraham, because the question for discussion was, go down and see whether or not the cry that's come up from Sodom and Gomorrah is accurate and as bad as are things as bad as we think they are, because if they are, then I'm going to destroy the whole city. And Abraham begins this negotiating thing where he says, you wouldn't destroy the whole city if there were 50 good people and 50 righteous people, and he negotiates down to 10. But I guess the thing that was interesting, after reading that several times, was this 3 people, one of which stayed there, and like I say, he is clearly identified as God, but the other 2 went on down, and those are the 2 that met with Lot and at the city gates. So anyway, that's just by way of review, just something to think about. Chapter 19 begins, the 2 angels entered Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in Sodom's gate. And I'm sure you went through the situation where they tried the angels did some stuff that made it clear they weren't ordinary people. And Lot tried to convince his sons-in-law that they should get out of town with him, and they thought he was nuts. And so finally, when it was about to become morning, and the angels knew that God was going to destroy the place, these angels, and that's what they're called here, they each had 2 hands. They took a person in each hand. They took Lot's wife, and both of Lot's daughters. So that's 4 people. And they literally had to practically drag them out of Sodom so that they would get away as God began to rain down fire and brimstone. And, of course, don't look back or you turn into a pillar of salt. And we have Lot's wife turn back and became a pillar of salt, which I've seen, by the way. Yes.
Well, it's too bad they couldn't handle, one of them couldn't handle 3 people.
What?
You said there they had 4 hands and they drug 4 of them away. Well, there was 5.
Who was the 5th one?
The wife. Wasn't there 2 daughters? And
yeah, there was the wife.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
The wife and 2 daughters. That's 4.
Yeah, I
I
had a brain malfunction. Sorry.
It's the new math. Anyway,
Comment?
Yes.
I just want to mention, Michael Heiser has a book on angels. It's a fairly recent book, but it's a scholarly review of the word angel in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Second Temple literature.
Okay.
And
I'd like to read that.
It's a lot more than just angel means messenger, which means human.
Yes.
It's actually a massive topic, and it's a whole book of scholarly research, heavily footnoted and heavily referenced, but it's super interesting.
Yep.
Where he goes through all this and what the Hebrews had in their minds at the time that these scriptures were being written. It was very interesting.
Okay. I look forward to looking at that. This Michael Heiser that Ward's mentioning is Heiser, and you can find him on the internet. And he's written several books, all of which are very interesting. And he's the one that got me most interested was The Unseen Realm, where he talks about the divine council, which is mentioned several times in Scripture, and yet we in our modern Christian background know nothing about it, really, because we're not taught about it at all. Did you have something else?
Well, one of the interesting things he brings out in all his books and in his online seminars on YouTube, you can see he's got seminars called Supernatural Seminar. He's got another one you can look up called On the Unseen Realm. Very interesting. One of the things he brings out is that through our church history, through the way our culture is developed, through the way our language has developed, and the way translations work, and all these factors, through the church, we've been conditioned into certain perceptions of our scriptures that really aren't correct.
Yeah.
And a lot of his work is trying to go back to, let's go back to the origins, let's go back to the way they were thinking and looking at this stuff.
Yeah. That's a very good
His
point.
point is this stuff is all important. It's all of it is important. It's all interconnected. And it's like, it's all built together. So if you take out certain pieces, which is what we've done, there are many pieces we've just done. And he says, our culture has taught us to have this phrase that, oh, this part of Scripture is not important, and this other part of Scripture is not important. It doesn't apply today.
Yeah.
And there's so much of that now that we've lost a huge chunk of what's going on.
Yeah. I understand it. And one of his big points, or at least the bigger takeaway I got from a lot of his stuff, is that the understanding of God's word and his universe by the people that lived at the time of Yeshua was different than the one we have today. And that difference is notable in terms of things like the divine council, because that was common knowledge back then. And all if you want to call them biblical scholars, all theologians of the time knew about it. But that's been lost. That's been, like you say, it's been dropped in modern times. And so it's not because it went away. Yeah.
Right, it's kind of the idea. If Yahweh put it in there, it's probably important.
It's important, yeah. Well, then after Lot and after his wife got turned into a pillar of salt, and they ended up in Zoar, which, by the way, I think I don't want to repeat myself, but there is a little town at the south end of the Dead Sea down here, right in this area. It's over on the Jordanian side, called Zoar. And Zoar is there to this day. Go back there. Oops. Excuse me while I mess around with this and try to get my act together. Anyway, they went to Zoar and they hid in the cave. Lot and his two daughters ended up hiding in this cave. And starting, I guess, in verse 30, from what I understand, I don't know whether John read the last half of chapter 19, but I think I will, and we'll talk about Lot's daughters and what went on there. So I'm going to start in Genesis chapter 19, verse 30. It says, Lot departed from Zoar and lived in the mountains along with his two daughters because he was afraid to live in Zoar. Instead, he and his two daughters lived in a cave. And then the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man in the land to sleep with us, as is the custom of all in the land. Come, let us get our father to drink wine so that we can sleep with him and preserve our father's line. So they got their father to drink wine that night, and the firstborn came and slept with their father. He did not know when she lay down or when she got up. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, Look, I slept with my father last night. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight so you can go sleep with him and we can preserve our father's line. That night they got their father to drink wine, and the younger went and slept with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son and named him Moab, and he is the father of the Moabites today. And the younger also gave birth to a son, and she named him Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Ammonites of today. Okay, so I thought it'd be important to talk about that for just a minute. Yes, sorry.
What I find interesting about this story, I mean, there's a lot of, it's all interesting, but what's jumped out at me on this one, this time through, was the fact that Lot tried to get his son-in-laws to go with him, and they wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So, do we have any, these kids of his probably grew up in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yep.
And so we don't know anything about them. We don't know their ages. We don't know anything. And so I wonder if that had much of an impact on what you just read.
Yes, I'll bet it did. I mean, the Bible is incredibly graphic most of the time. Not so directly here, but it's pretty clear what was going on in terms of life in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so you can imagine that they were very familiar with what we now know are described by the Bible as deviant lifestyles, you know? So they were bound to be used to them and knowledgeable of them, and the very idea of sleeping with their father might not have been that unusual to them. Yeah. There's other thoughts there too. Another thought is that given that they had, witnessed the clearly, what do you want to call it, biblical destruction of their environment, and it looked like World War III down there, they might have legitimately, or at least given passing thought to the fact that they're the only ones left. And if they didn't do it, nobody would repopulate the earth. And so this was not something to be shied away from. This was a necessary duty. I mean, that's a thought. John?
Well, that would assume that Lot thought everybody was sinning like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
I mean, would he think about that about Uncle Abraham?
Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of shoots that one in the air.
Well, that was my question. I mean, these women are worried about the next generation, the generations that follow, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, why not go
find Abraham?
Yeah. Why doesn't Lot go find Abraham? I guess he likes living in a van down by the river or in a cave, I guess.
In a cave, yeah. That's a good question. That's a very good question. Why didn't he go look for him? I don't know. This is the last we hear of Lot and his daughters. The name of the first one, Moab, does anybody know what the name Moab means? I figured you might. But
Mother of all bombs?
Mother of all bombs. It's the name of a city in Utah. No, it means from my father. Ab and Abi is father, so Moab is from my father. And then Ben Ami, these are common enough, and there aren't that many Hebrew words really, biblical Hebrew words. Ben is son of, and Ami is my people, so it's son of my people. The thing to me that I think is fascinating is there is some good reason to believe that this area down here is where Sodom and Gomorrah were. And there's also, it's commonly known that this area over here on the east side of the Dead Sea is Moab, and this area up here just to north of Moab is Ammon. And the capital of Jordan today is named Ammon. And so that's the same Ammon from which Ben Ami came from, if you will, and that's the same Moab that Moab came from. So these places, that's why I say this is not like Narnia. These places really exist, and you can go find them today if you want to. Yeah.
Is Moab, the land of Moab, part of the modern state of Jordan, or is that Arabia? Or?
Nope, it's modern state of Jordan. Here,
all that is.
Let me back up a little bit. Oops, wrong one. They're over here, and Arabia is south. Okay, Arabia is way over here. It's a big, huge peninsula. And so, they're what they are is they're southern Jordan. As a matter of fact, southern Jordan is kind of this funny looking shape that kind of goes up like this. Right there, and it actually has a port. The port of Jordan is on that part of the Red Sea, and the city down there is called Aqaba. And so the southern part of Jordan is Edom, which we'll talk about in a little while. The next one up is Moab, and the next one up is Ammon. And then there's some northern parts of Jordan, which are heavily Romanized, if you will. But all the little, let's see, I wonder if I go back to that map. not very good at making this thing do all that I want to. These little rivers. There's little rivers up there. There's this one here. It's called the. Can't read it from here. Well, anyway, if you can drive the highway, there's a highway that goes right up the east side of the
That
east
the
side of the
Jabba-
Dead Sea. Beg
The
pardon?
Jabaka or something like that? Is that the one where Esau or Jacob runs into Esau?
No, that's the Jabbok. The Jabbok is up here.
Oh,
But
all right.
it's the Zered.
There's so many rivers up
There's
there. I forgot.
Arnon and the Zered. That's what it is. Those are the two rivers that flow into the Dead Sea. And they are still there today. There's still water that flows in them. They're not very big rivers, to say the least. And they still have the biblical names, which is pretty remarkable. Of course, it's pretty hard to confuse a river. If it's still running, there's no reason for it not to be where it says it is. And those rivers are there. The reason I mentioned the Arnon Valley, there's an Arnon River that runs in the Arnon Valley, and that's a separation between Moab and Ammon. That whole area over there becomes real important in the book of Deuteronomy, Numbers and Deuteronomy. Let's see what else I want to say about that. The Moabites and the Ammonites were known to worship Chemosh. I just was interested in that. Chemosh was some pagan god that was often called the fish god. Anyway, I don't know why I thought that. I write stuff like that down thinking I'm going to make a point about that, and then I forget what I was going to say. Kind of messes it up. So if there's nothing else about Moab and Ammon, we'll go on to chapter 20. Chapter 20 is kind of an interlude. The thing about these stories is all of them are fairly compact. What's another word? Capsulized. And so sometimes it's hard to get the chronological order out of them. The book of Genesis is in general fairly chronological. I remember we talked about how the table of nations and the genealogy in chapters 10 and 11, it could be argued that chapter 11 should go before chapter 10, because chapter 11 is the story of the Tower of Babel, and chapter 10 is called the Table of Nations. And it's the Tower of Babel that gave the Table of Nations. So they might ought to. But anyway, the reason I say that is because we're going to do some completely different topic here in chapter 20. My Bible has a little heading here that says, Sarah rescued from Abimelech. So I'll read it, and then we'll talk about it. Genesis 20. From there, Abraham traveled to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he lived in Gerar, Abraham said about his wife Sarah, "She is my sister," so that Abimelech, king of Gerar, had Sarah brought to him. So let's stop there and talk about this for a couple of minutes. Traveled to the region of the Negev. Go over here. I wonder how you erase all this. I don't know how you do it. Anyway, the Kadesh is right here. That says Kadesh, and there it is right there. Shur is a town over here on the Mediterranean coast. And then Negev, I thought there was the word Negev. Negev, as I said, it's one meaning of the word is this desert down here. This desert is called the Negev Desert, but Negev means south, and it is in the south. So it's the southern desert, and he settled between Kadesh and Shur, and lived in Gerar. While he lived in Gerar, Abraham introduced. Gerar is a city that no longer exists, but it would be between Gaza and Kadesh Barnea, which is not far. Heck, it's only 30, 40 miles. And it's Palestinian area. This whole southwestern coast of Israel is the land of the Philistines. Yeah. Yeah, push it up and there you go.
Do we have any idea what the climate was like back there? Today it's desert,
Yeah.
but 2,000 years ago or longer, I wonder what it was like. Because when you say go to the south, because that's what Negev means,
Yep.
it may not have been desert.
Oh, that's a very good point. Because, at one point in time, when we first heard of Sodom and Gomorrah, is when Abraham and Lot, their herdsmen got to fighting one another. And so Lot and Abraham went up on this hill, the same hill we talked about before. And Abraham said, we need to separate. We've gotten too big to live together. You take one side, I'll take the other. You just pick. And Lot said, he saw the valley of Sodom and Gomorrah and how lush and green it was and chose that one. And boy, I tell you, you see it today, and it is the exact opposite of lush and green. You'd be doing good to find anything green there. So you can assume, it's not unreasonable to assume that God's destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah changed that landscape. And if it changed that landscape, it changed a bunch of the landscape around it, which this is. So yeah, it could have been different. Given that the chronology is right, it might be in the process of changing. But I tell you today, like I say, it makes a lot of the stuff south of Phoenix look lush and green, because it's really barren. But that's a good point. So this Abimelech, or Abimelech, now if I pronounce it Abimelech, you can probably figure out what that means. So Abi is father, and Melech is king. So essentially it means father king. And for that reason, a lot of people think that Abimelech may not be his name. It may be more of a title. It may be like the empires were a little bit rare at this time. What you really had was city-states. And if a city got very large, it was bound to have a government of some type. And the government was some king. And the king of some of these city-states, Gerar, for example, might have been called Abimelech, father king. So that could be a title or it could be a name. It's hard to say. But anyway, he was the ruler, if you will, of that area. And it says that Abram traveled, chapter 20 again, Abram traveled to the region of the Negev. Now he traveled there from Hebron, which is up here. He traveled from Hebron down to the region of the Negev, which was kind of just a little bit, basically, west of where he was. And he settled in Gerar. And Gerar was out in the desert, yeah.
So do we know why he's in Hebron?
No, but
if we're going to go in chronological order, I mean, what just happened in the previous chapter? Sodom and Gomorrah just got nuked.
Yep.
And then he says, "Oh, I'm moving."
Yep.
So why is he? How is it? Where is his move relative to where we think Sodom and Gomorrah is?
Okay. His move is away. His move is
Going
south
north?
and west of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? Mostly west.
So I have a thought.
Okay.
Maybe he's thinking, my market at Sodom and Gomorrah,
Yeah.
despite their wanting in moral values, still need things to live off of.
Yeah. And they're not there anymore.
They just evaporated.
Yes. Yeah.
So I need to go somewhere else and
Yep.
see if I can
Yep.
sell my wares somewhere else.
Yep. I think an even more likely one is that where I used to water and feed my sheep is no more. It's no more a place of water and feeding sheep.
There you
and
go.
I need to find a place to take care of my sheep.
So
which
he's
off.
on the move then.
He's
He's
on the
looking
move
for
then.
somewhere else.
He's on the move. That's a very good point. That does tend to make chapter 20 follow 19. Ward's got something.
I just looked up a weather timeline for North Africa.
Yeah.
And 4,000 years ago, said it was more moist, more vegetation, more forest than today.
Good. Good. That makes sense. How about that? Some totally arbitrary source that kind of supports what the Bible says. Can't beat that. Moving right along, verse 3. Oh, so Abimelech, this is the end of verse 2. Well, verse 2. Abraham said about his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." So Abimelech, king of Gerar, had Sarah brought to him. Now here we are again. This is the same thing that Abram did to his wife in Egypt. He says, "This is my sister. Here, hi, my name's Abraham. Meet my sister Sarah." And so the king basically says, "Pretty good looking sister you have there. How about if I buy her from you?" Now, you'd have thought, I mean, I don't know, I'm making this up, right? You'd have thought Abraham, number one, might have learned something from the first time, but number two, might have raised some objection. But it doesn't really say that that's exactly what happened. It says, had Sarah brought to him. In other words, it kind of took him from Abraham. Don't know. Kings are used to that. When the king wants something, he just goes and gets it. Yep.
That is a difference.
Yep.
You could be a little bit more sympathetic for Abraham here in that before he didn't he didn't have any problem. Here it implies that he just grabbed him and
Yeah.
And we'll find out later that when this whole thing blows up again, just like it did before,
Yep.
Abraham will say, "Well, I thought this was a wicked place." He never said that about.
No, he didn't say that
Egypt.
about Egypt.
Right.
Good point. Good point, yeah. We'll go on. That's all right. Verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman." Verse 4, now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said to Yahweh, he said, "Lord, would you destroy a nation even though it is innocent? Didn't he himself say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother'? I did this with a clear conscience and clean hands." So they obviously, Abimelech was right? He's basically innocent. He didn't know. They led him to believe exactly the opposite, right? John?
So it's deja vu again, except about, will you slay a righteous nation?
Yeah.
Who said that before to
Well,
God?
Abraham, right? Yep, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I was going to say something else. So when I did the thing last week, we got into why did Sarah laugh?
Yep.
And this one commentary that I borrowed to get the 3-year Torah cycle from, a hafta is what it's called. They had a comment that as soon as she laughed, her ability to reproduce was fired up. It's just like all of a sudden she's
me.
yeah.
Okay.
And I suppose you could argue she was pregnant at that time. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I'm getting at. So what I'm trying to say here is the relevance of it here is God says you're going to die.
Yeah.
The other one, I think the punishment was just, well, maybe you won't die, but there will be a lot of I don't know what the disease was, but it wasn't good.
Yeah,
but
you
it
mean
wasn't death.
with the Egyptians.
Right.
Yeah.
So here, it's like God saying, I got skin in the game.
Yes. That's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah. I care about Sarah now a lot more than I did back then. Not exactly. Anyway, verse 6 says, then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience. I have also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I have not let you touch her." So somehow or another, God has manipulated circumstances so that Abimelech couldn't go to bed with Sarah. He says, "Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, know that you will certainly die, you and all who are yours." So needless to say, there's a lot of interesting things here. Was Abimelech a believer?
Now he is.
Yeah, I was going to say, certainly after the
He isn't
dream.
now.
Certainly after the dream.
If he's into the whole breathing thing.
Yeah.
Well, I like this this question and answering here. I mean, it's they're being creditors, if you will. They're being diplomatic with each other.
Yeah.
Because Abraham is saying in a question, are you going to do this to slay a righteous nation? And then God says, he says, all right, that's reasonable. I won't kill you. Mm-hmm. He says, I'm doing you a favor.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what, I'm here to give you, I'm make a deal with you. I'm making you a favor. You get to live.
Yeah.
That's the favor.
But you better fix this. Yeah. Yep. That's a good
Be
one.
very careful.
Yep. So it would appear, this is just my assumption on this thing, is that Abimelech probably knew a little of Abraham's God, because Abraham didn't necessarily try to hide it. And we'll find out later on that Abimelech respected the blessings and the power that Abraham seemed to have. And so this is probably a visitation of a God much different than Abimelech had ever had before. And as John said, although he may not have been a believer before, he is now. Now that doesn't mean he's a believer from the standpoint of, let me sign up, you're the real thing. But it means, here's a pretty powerful God that I probably ought to know something about among all these others that I have in worship.
He's a Yahweh fearer.
Yes, he's a Yahweh fearer. That's a good way to put it.
I just want to say one other thing. It says he describes Abraham as the prophet, Navi.
Yes.
That's the first time that word is used.
That's good.
Is there?
That's good. Well, I'm going to talk about that word a little more as we move along.
Hold on.
So, moving along, or do you have another question? Yeah, Marvin.
It's really not a comment. I just want to, the last part of that where he says, but if you don't give her back, you will surely die along with all who belong to you. Hollywood picked up on that on a Western with Clint Eastwood.
Oh, really?
The name of the movie is Unforgiven, and it comes in at the end of the movie.
Really? You and all who are with you. Okay. Interesting. It takes a second to come on.
He tells people not to shoot at him or there'll be consequences along that same line.
Okay. Verse 8 goes on and says, early in the morning, the very next morning, Abimelech got up, called all his servants together, and personally told them all these things. So he told them all about the dream and all about what God said. And the men were terrified. And then Abimelech called Abraham in and said to him, what have you done to us? How did I sin against you that you have brought such enormous guilt on me and on my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. Abimelech also said to Abraham, what did you intend when you did this thing? In other words, what on earth were you after? What were you thinking? Abimelech is clearly upset, and God obviously made a pretty big impression on him with this visitation, and he wants to set things right. Did you have something, John?
So he's not just doing this, he didn't just call Abraham and hey, let's you and I have a man-to-man talk. Mm-hmm. He's got an audience here, right?
Yeah.
You going to talk about that, or?
Well, no, you mean about the fact that all the servants were with him and everything?
Right.
Yeah.
Why are they there?
Well, they're witnesses. Obviously, he felt like that was important somehow or another.
Well, I was thinking more like, I have my honor I have to hold here as the king. Right? And I made her my wife. And also I had this dream and some God called Yahweh is like, he's got to try to save face.
Good point.
And so he's trying to make Abraham be the bad guy, which
there's
some element of that.
Yep.
But
no, that's a very good point, and that fits in with the thing that happens at the end too. So I like that. So verse 11 says, Abraham replied, I thought, and this is where you were talking earlier, there is absolutely no fear of God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother. and she became my wife. So when God had me wander from my father's house, I said to her, show your loyalty to me wherever we go, and say about me, he's my brother. So this would indicate that this is something that they had been doing rather often, or it was a kind of a common practice. I swear, I shouldn't say that. I still don't completely understand this whole thing about why it's advantageous for him to introduce his wife as his sister. But be that as it may. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take his word for it. I mean, this is Abraham after all, and he
Yes.
said this place was a wicked place.
Yeah.
And so,
He says, the takeaway I get is that by introducing her as his sister, he's saving his own skin. Because if somebody wanted her bad enough, somebody like Abimelech, you could just knock old Abraham off and take her. And this way he would be less likely to do so.
right. I mean, I'm just going back to, you know, how long was this conversation going on, or was it he just took her and that's it? I don't care
No.
what-
He had some time because
Oh, he's saying he did it here? He admitted essentially that he's
it's
admitting
in
that.
verse 6, it says, this is God talking to Abimelech. He says, I have also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I have not let you touch her. So
No,
there
no,
must have been, is that what you're getting at?
No, what I was saying earlier about him taking her, you know, was there any discussion between
No. None that's recorded.
Abimelech and Abraham,
Yeah.
Abram?
None that's discussed.
Okay, so he could have gone to war right now. He could have said, you know what, I'm going to let God handle this because, like I said earlier, he's got skin in the game.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's fair. I hadn't thought about it that way. Yeah.
I don't think this was just whenever it was convenient for him to say that, because if you read verse 20:13, the end of it, it says, every place we go, say about me,
Yes.
he is my brother. So this was happening every time.
Yeah, it seemed to be a common thing. You're right. I hadn't noticed that until just now. That's true. Let's go on. Verse 14. Then Abimelech took sheep and cattle and male and female slaves, gave them to Abraham, and returned his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, look, my land is before you, settle wherever you want. And to Sarah he said, look, I am giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a verification of your honor to all who are with you. You are fully vindicated. So that's a big long paragraph full of all kinds of stuff. And what's the point of all of that?
I'm kind of a little confused, to be honest with you, because it's like they're validating, they're making a contract or a treaty or an agreement, or whatever, because there's a transaction going on here, right?
Okay.
He's giving her, unless it's just to be viewed as a gift, this is just,
I think it's number one, he's still clearly deathly afraid of Abraham's God.
right?
And number two, he says, I never slept with her. I'm giving her back, and I'm giving you all this stuff here so that you know that I never did anything. She's vindicated. She's guiltless.
So he's returning the dowry if there ever was one, or?
I don't know about that, but something along those lines. Yeah, Elaine?
I heard something on the radio this week about our view of marriage, one man and one woman, and I think God is validating that
That could be. That could be.
because now they're trying to get polyamory or something like that, where you can have like 3 men. They don't even have to be a man and a woman.
Well, yep.
Do we know anything about the female servants that they just acquired?
No, and that's another thing I just first caught on to with that. Although I'm sure that by this time Abraham's household is quite large, right? Because he came back with servants from Egypt, and they've been doing well financially, if you will. So he's probably doing pretty well. Yeah.
I got in a discussion with someone a couple years ago about this, and he took a much more cynical view of Abraham. He says, this guy's running a racket. Look at he's pimping out Sarah, you know, and look at all this stuff I've got. That's why I'm blessed. That's not good. I mean, that's obviously a negative.
That's a cynical view of this, to say the least.
Right.
I'm not going to buy that one. Okay, also he says, settle wherever you want. In other words, I'm not asking you to leave. That's in contrast to the Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, take whatever I gave you and just get out. Don't come back. And this, he says, find the piece of land you want and settle in it. You know, you're all right with me. Verse 17 goes on and says, and then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves, so that they could bear children. For Yahweh had completely closed all the wombs in Abimelech's household on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife.
There's the transaction.
There's the transaction. All right.
They paid effectively a tithe to the priest to
Open the wombs.
resolve the issue between Yehovah and Abimelech.
That's a good way to look at it. In other words, God's punishment to Abimelech was to make all the women in his household unable to conceive. And by vindicating Sarah in this way, Abraham prayed to God, and God released that.
By the way, in verse 7, I said Navi was the first time prophet is used, and the first time prayer is used, Palal, in this case.
Oh, I'll be darned.
That's the first time it's used there. Hold on, Elena.
Okay.
This must have gone on for quite a while.
Yes, because how would you know that the wounds had been closed?
That's right.
Yeah, I thought of that too. Yeah. And he probably also must have had a pretty good sized household. Anyway, so that's a story in and of itself. The thing is I know one of these days when we get there, we're going to know things about this story that we don't know now. That's going to tell us some stuff.
Question: What is the translation in 18 where Yehovah had fast closed up all the wombs?
Mine says wounds.
Wombs or wombs?
WOMBS.
Oh, okay. I thought you said wound.
Well, no, wombs.
Okay, that's
I'm
right.
not a very good pronouncer.
No,
of
that's
it.
right. I'm
Okay.
just looking at my notes. Yeah,
Yeah.
all right. Matrix is also another translation for that.
Okay.
It's also translated.
So God played. I think, let's see, a couple thoughts about that. This is not the first time we've seen God interact with so-called non-believers, right? I mean, God, being God, can do anything he wants, right? And if he wants to make an obvious, big impression on someone who has heretofore denied his very existence or didn't even know about him, he can sure do it. And I think this is one of those cases. He like I say, Pharaoh was another one. So God can do whatever he wants. God's God and you're not. That's the way I put that. Yeah.
Well, he can make him a believer, but he may not make him a follower.
That's the difference. That's
Yes.
a good point. That's the difference.
Right.
I mean, if you I remember there's a very graphic example in the book of Acts where Paul, while under arrest, gets chummy with some Roman guy whose wife essentially dies, and Paul manages to resurrect her. And you'd think the guy would think that'd be a pretty good thing, but he goes on about his business and then becomes the jerk he was beforehand.
Had you ever met his wife?
John. Nope. Okay, so much for that idea.
What was my comment? Oh, you were talking about God can do anything. Well, yeah, but he's doing things here. It isn't just willy-nilly. I can do, look, I can do this, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
He has a purpose. There's a
Yes.
logic to this.
Yes.
There's reasoning behind why
Yes.
he's doing it.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, but one of the fun things, I'm convinced, the fun things to do is to see that whenever God reaches down and interacts with human activities, he always accomplishes four or five things with the same action. The same single action does a bunch of different things. It's not just one thing. So again, I'm sure there's a whole lot more about this whole story that we can learn about. But we'll move along. Yes.
God chide Abraham for saying that she was his sister? Did he
Nope.
come out and accuse him at all?
Nope. Abraham gets away with this at least these 2 times, and furthermore, it would appear that he passed the habit on to his son.
Said what?
He passed the habit on to his son.
Oh.
So we'll read about that in upcoming chapters.
He raised the status of Abraham through this.
Yes, he did. He enriched
A
him.
lot.
Yes, he did. He enriched him. Did you have a question or comment?
The footnotes in my Bible say that Abraham made 3 feeble excuses for his deceptions. He thought there was no fear of God in Gerar. He claimed he did not speak an untruth when he said that Sarah was his sister because she was his half-sister, and thus, or this was an arrangement they had previously agreed upon.
Okay. So it calls all 3 of those rather feeble excuses. I think I'd agree with that. Moving on to chapter 21. It says, Yahweh came to Sarah as he had said, and Yahweh did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. At the appointed time, God had told him. Abraham named his son who was born to him, the one Sarah bore to him, Isaac. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears will laugh with me. She also said, who would have told Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Obviously, an incredible miracle occurred here. That's pretty cool.
You have a comment?
Yes.
So in the story, in the when I did the class last week, there was a lot of hints about the Moedim and that this could have been Passover, and
Yep.
there's commentary on that as well. So if that's true, and I just suggested earlier that when she laughed, and assuming that's during the Passover, that she got pregnant at that time. So this, if that's true, then 9 months from now would be another Moedim, which doesn't, I'm not sure fits anywhere, unless it's like Hanukkah or something like that. But
Yeah.
I don't. Do you have any thoughts on that, or
No,
because it says Moedim here as well?
I had never heard that. I know that it is possible to make some assessments about this birth being on a moed, but I hadn't heard the thing about the laughter. Now, the thing about this last week, whenever the 3 visitors were there, and they announced to, I mean, you gotta laugh at the way God does this stuff. Abraham's out there being the host, watching these guests eat this meal that he had people prepare for him.
Right.
And then one of them says, "Is Sarah around?" And Abraham, I'm sure Abraham kind of says, "Well, yeah, she's over there in the tent where she's supposed to be." Kind of, I'm making this up. And he says something to the effect, "Well, next year about this time," he says, "I'm going to be here and Sarah's going to give birth to a son." Or not, I'm going to be here. Of next year about this time, Sarah is going to give birth to a son.
So then that would have to mean that.
That would be 9 months. So I don't think that was a moed. This could be.
Right.
I mean, the actual birth could be, but 9 months before any of them. The moeds tend to be 6 months apart.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not arguing it too much, but the other part of that story that I thought was kind of interesting is she laughed to herself, it said in that part. You remember? That she laughed to herself. And so, and one of them says, "Why did she laugh? Why did she laugh? Can't God do anything?" And she says, "I did not laugh." And he says, "Oh, yes, you did."
A real quick question about the culture at this time. when strangers would come to a camp where they had their tents pitched or where they lived, whatever, did they separate? Did they make the women go one place and the men another?
Yes.
So it's like the Saudis do today.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
And so she was intentionally separated
Yes.
from the men.
Yep. The men would be having their meal, and the women would essentially be cooking and serving and eating when they could, kind of a thing. Yeah, it wouldn't be easy to be a woman at these times, without doubt.
Yeah, my take on that last week was I pointed out that God talks to Abraham.
Yes.
He says to Abraham,
Yes.
didn't you, I think that's right. Didn't you, I concluded that it was saying, didn't you tell your wife that I was going to do this thing, that she was going to have a child a year earlier? I thought it was a year earlier.
I don't think so. Let's go back and read it, just while we're here. The three visitors.
It's 18, I guess.
It's
Right.
it's chapter 18.
Right.
And let's look at starting about verse 8. It says, Then Abraham took curds and milk and the calf that he prepared and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the tree. Where is your wife Sarah? They asked him. There, in the tent, he answered. Then the Lord said, I will certainly come back to you in about a year's time, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old and getting on in years. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing, so she laughed to herself. After I have become shriveled up and my Lord is old, will I have this delight? Now this is to herself.
That's verse 12.
Yeah, that's verse 12. And then, but the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, can I really have a baby when I'm old?
That's
Is
what I
anything
was-
impossible for the Lord?
Why is he speaking to Abraham? My point.
Well, that's fair. That's a very good point. It could very well be, what, you didn't tell her?
Right.
Yeah, that could be. That fits. But it says,
And then later keep reading.
no, it says, is anything impossible for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will come back to you, and in about a year, she will have a son.
So Yahweh is saying that to Abraham.
Yes.
What is the deal here? Don't you believe me? I said I was going to do this. That's kind of how I'm interpreting
Yeah,
it.
and then Sarah denied it. Sarah says, I did not laugh, she said, because she was afraid. But he replied, no, you did laugh.
Right.
So you're right, it's kind of funny because the God tends to talk, or it would appear, is talking directly to Abraham, even though Sarah's sitting there listening.
It's almost like she jumped in the conversation
Yes.
and said,
Yes.
if Yahweh is talking to Abraham, she jumps in and says, I didn't laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I didn't do that. Yep. Okay, back to where we were. Chapter 21, verse 8. The child grew and was weaned. And Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son mocking, and the one Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham. So she said to Abraham, drive out this slave with her son, for the son of this slave will not be co-heir with my son Isaac. So you get what's going on there. There's a couple things to talk about. How old do you suppose
I think he was between 1 and 3. They kept
Isaac,
nursed
yeah.
him for a long time.
Yeah, between 1 and 3. That's what I was going to say. Could have been as old as 4. But there's an even better thing for that. If you look at this, if you go back to Genesis chapter 16, keep your finger here because we're coming right back here. But if you go back to Genesis 16, and in verse 16 it says, This is, so, verse 15. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son Hagar had. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. 86, okay? And then if you go to verse 17, or chapter 17, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord said to him, okay, we don't need to do that one necessarily. That's not as good a one as 21, the place we just were. 21, verse 6. Sarah said, God made me laugh, and everyone who hears will laugh with me. She also said, who would have told Abraham that Sarah would well, I thought it had 100. Oh, no, it's verse 5. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. So it tells you right there. Abraham was 86 when Ishmael was born. Abraham was 100 when Isaac born. So Ishmael must have been 14. And therefore, this weaning, Ishmael must have been 16, 17, something like that. Right? Okay.
So in that verse 5, there's a standalone olive tav between
Oh, really?
when his son, standalone olive tav, Isaac was born unto him.
Okay. That's good.
It's kind of interesting because Isaac and Yeshua have a lot of
Yes.
obvious.
A lot of, one prefigures the other. Verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son, that is, Ishmael, the one Hagar the Egyptian born to Abraham, and so she said to Abram, drive out this slave with her son, for the son of this slave will not be the co-heir with my son Isaac. Now this was a very difficult thing for Abraham because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be concerned about the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her, because your offspring will be traced through Isaac. But I will also make a nation of the slave's son, because he is your offspring.
Okay, what verse did you just read?
I just read 21:13.
So in the, let me read 12 in King James.
Okay.
God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous unto thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman, and all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for all Isaac shall thy seed be called. I don't know what yours said.
Mine said, because your offspring will be traced through Isaac. So it says the same thing.
Well, and then the next verse it says, and also of the son of the bondwoman I will make a nation because he is thy seed. Okay, it says seed both times.
Okay. Geez, I wrote a note here and I lost it. So hope we can find it.
Jerry, I have a comment on that.
Sure.
Whenever Sarah gets upset and doesn't ask, she tells Abraham to get rid of the slave woman and the kid.
Yep.
Hasn't she overstepped her bounds as a wife at that point in time? Because the man is supposed to make that decision. I mean, he can take what she wants into consideration, but he doesn't have to do it.
Yep.
But then God intervened and told Abraham to do it. I think that's very interesting.
I think it's very important because it's not at all clear that Abraham would have done it. Because even though he realized that Sarah was not Ishmael's mother, Abraham was certainly his father, and he loved. I mean, he had 14 years to love this guy. So he was not at all happy about this. That's why it says, verse 11, this was a very difficult thing for Abraham. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Well, when Ishmael and Hagar were kicked out of the house earlier,
Yes.
he kind of punted the responsibility and says to Sarah, hey, she's your
slave. Do what you want.
Servant.
Yeah.
Who am I to tell you what to do in that regard?
Now, the difference there, though, was she hadn't given birth yet, right? And so Sarah said, she says, you've been uppity one too many times. Get out of here. And so she threw her out, and Hagar went out and wandered in the woods, or whatever.
You might be right. I don't remember.
But she was pregnant, but she hadn't given birth. And so, speaking as a member of the masculine gender, your feelings about a child are much different
No, I
when it
appreciate
exists
that.
outside the womb than when it exists inside the womb.
I wasn't sure if he had been born yet or not.
Now, I'm just being smart aleck.
Can I go back a little bit to
Sure.
that verse 5, where he says, well, let me talk about 6. Where does it say he was circumcised? Verse 8.
Yes.
And the child grew and was weaned.
No, that's weaned. Yeah, that's not circumcised. 8 days.
Okay.
Well, I
So-
read that too, but I can't remember. I can't seem to find it
Verse
right.
4.
Okay.
And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. So I'm just trying to criticize. Well, it's a commandment here, and if you're making a connection between Yeshua and Isaac, he was circumcised on the 8th day.
Yeshua was too.
Yeshua certainly was too. So if you're a follower of Yeshua, would you do these things? Or did that got put away? Did that got nailed to the cross?
No. No. Obviously, your question is rhetorical, right?
Real quick, was Ishmael circumcised? I think he probably was, but
Who? Ishmael?
yeah. Was
Well,
he 13?
all you have to do, I think, is go back and see if the covenant of circumcision, the story is in chapter 17.
Yeah, he was when he was that was his bar.
Oh, no. I think he was. I think he was because
They all were when they.
I think he's spoken of specifically.
This was one of the telltale signs that it might have been dealing with the Passover, because you can't have a Passover meal if not everyone has been circumcised.
Yep.
And everyone in Abraham, including
Yeah.
Abraham himself.
Yeah, it's chapter 17.
Ishmael was.
Every one of the males must be circumcised. Yep. Good catch. Okay, let's go.
Jerry,
Yes.
I also notice in, let's see, what is it, verse, let me check this mic. Okay, the microphone's good. Let's see, in verse 9, where it says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who she had born to Abraham, laughing. That word laughing means mock. Laughing stock or mocking. So
Yep.
he was mocking.
Yep.
So that would tend to make her not happy.
Yep, that was, as a matter of fact, mine does say mocking, but the thing that's always kind of gendered in my mind is teasing. You know, it's what an older brother might do, and especially an older teenage brother, you know? So, yeah, it was mocking, just kind of, and you could see that Sarah, being, you know, a very jealous, protective kind of mother, would say, you know, I never was really into this whole thing with Hagar and that anyway, you know, get him out of here. Wasn't a very nice thing for Sarah to say, but yeah.
Who was it that said, you're a bloody husband to me? And
That was Moses' wife,
oh,
and that was whenever they were leaving. Yeah.
okay.
But
And then I guess I missed it, but I think you were talking about you got to where Abraham was circumcised. You got that
Yeah.
verse
Yes.
17,
It's verse 17, yeah. And
24.
all the males in his household. Yep. So anyway, Abraham is sitting there anguishing over this. Well, I don't want to go there quite yet. Let's look at a couple of other things. Go to Romans chapter 9, and let's see if that has anything that I want to talk about in it. There's two places in Paul's writings that talk about this, and we ought to talk about it for a minute. Romans chapter 9, starting in verse 6. This is about God's election of Israel, God's choosing of Israel. Verse 6 says, "But it is not as though the word of God has failed, for not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. Neither are they all children because they are Abraham's descendants. On the contrary, in Isaac your seed will be called," which is what you just quoted. That is, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but the children of promise are considered seed. For this is the statement of the promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah will have a son. Okay? So I think the point, I mean, you can tell me, what do you think the point is that Paul's trying to make there? Beg your pardon? Romans 9, verses, starting at verse 6 through 6 through 9. I'll tell you what I think. I think he's basically setting this up, the fact that what we can talk about, I don't remember, I think it's in Ephesians where he says, once you become, once you accept Yeshua, then you are reckoned as Isaac's seed. You're reckoned as an Israelite. And so it's not a matter of physical descent, it's a matter of spiritual descent. Let me say, it is not, that is verse 8, verse 6, 8. It says, that is, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but the children of the promise are considered seed. For this is the statement of promise, at this time I will come and Sarah will have a son. So we'll talk, there's another thing I want to talk about that in a minute too. But anyway, if you have any thoughts, let me know. Let me go on and let's finish this, and then we'll, there's another thing I want to talk about. So anyway, let's go to verse 14. Early in the morning, Abraham got up, took bread and a water skin, and put them on Hagar's shoulders, and sent her and the boy away. She left and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is right there. Okay. Beersheba reminds me a lot of Phoenix, actually, except smaller. When the water in the skin was gone, she left the boy under one of the bushes. And then she went and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she said, I can't bear to watch the boy die. And so she sat nearby and wept loudly. God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy from the place where he is. Get up, help the boy up, and sustain him, for I will make him a great nation. And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the water skin and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew, and he settled in the wilderness and became an archer. He settled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. The wilderness of Paran is over right around, it's like the north part of the Sinai Peninsula. Now, several things to point out here. Do you think it's unusual that she would get a wife for him from the land of Egypt? Do you think it'd be unusual for her to get a wife for Ishmael from the land of Egypt?
Well, that's
where she's
theory,
from.
The theory is, I mean, it doesn't, I don't know if it explicitly says that, but.
What, that she's, oh, I see. Yes. Right. If you believe that
and this is a good
Hagar,
argument that she is from Egypt.
If you believe that Hagar was from Egypt because she was part of the dowry that Pharaoh paid for Sarah the first time he tried to pass her off as his sister, or then that makes sense. Yes, Marvin.
How far away do you think Hagar settled from Abraham?
Well, that's what I was going to point out. Not very.
So there was a lot of. Do you think there was a lot of contact between Ishmael and?
The term a lot. Well, but I think Isaac and Ishmael remained in contact, and I'll tell you the main reason why. Because guess who shows up at Abraham's funeral? You know,
right.
So it was enough contact so that it was easy to tell Ishmael that your dad died. You should come to the funeral.
Right, and I'm just curious about the brotherly feelings for each other because they are brothers. They got the same dad. And that's important back then.
Yes,
it was. Important now, but probably more important back then.
And typically, a brother that's much younger like that really idolizes their older brother, you know. Maybe the poor choice of terms, but really looks up to their older brother. John?
So Ishmael shows up to Abraham's
Funeral.
funeral?
Yep. It says, we'll get there, of course, but it
Okay.
says that Ishmael and Isaac buried their father.
All right, I'll leave it at that.
Okay? Go ahead.
How old was Abraham when he died? If you could skip ahead.
175, I believe. But there's kind of we got enough time to do this, a little side, I guess there's two things I want to do. Let's go do the first one first and see if it even applies anymore. Let's go to Galatians chapter 4. Go eat popcorn. Okay, yeah, I remember this. This ought to be an interesting discussion for a few minutes. So go to Galatians chapter 4, and I'm going to start reading from verse 21. Now, this is Paul writing to the Galatians, right? And he says, "Tell me, you who want to be under the law, don't you hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave and the other by a free woman. But the one by the slave was born according to the flesh, while the one by the free woman was born as a result of a promise. These things are illustrations, for the women represent two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai and bears children into slavery. This is Hagar. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, which, by the way, is a very interesting thing for the location of Mount Sinai, and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother, for it is written, 'Rejoice, O barren woman who does not give birth, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor, for the children of the desolate are many, more numerous than those of the woman who has a husband.' Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise. But just as then the child born according to the flesh persecuted the one born according to the Spirit, so also now. But what does the Scripture say? Throw out the slave and her son, for the son of the slave will never inherit with the son of the free woman. Therefore, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman." I have always found that difficult. That's a very difficult passage, and I've got some thoughts, but I'd be interested in hearing what thoughts you might have first.
Well, I like how you started off in verse 21. "Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law?"
Yeah.
So first the question is he saying the law is, many people we know would say the law is horrible, terrible, wicked, evil, and awful.
Yeah, and
Is
it's
that
done away
what,
with.
is that what Paul's saying here?
Yeah.
If you go on, what he does is he gives you two choices.
Yep.
Choices. There's this law, metaphorically Jerusalem in the desert, on the earth, and then this other law form that's representative in the heavens.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So it's not against law, it's which one of the, interpreting this to mean,
Yep.
choose these two. That's your choice.
Yeah.
And so his audience, he's suggesting strongly, go with the free woman,
Yep.
and be a free man. In
Yep.
other words, to me that means I'm sovereign of the earthly realm, but I'm a bondservant at the heavenly realm, as opposed to if I went the other way.
Yeah, I like that. I can buy that. Another thought that I had about it, and I've always struggled with it because it, to me, it does kind of lend itself toward this thing of let's get rid of the law, right? But the thing I got out of it this time, at least, was it has to do more with your attitude of the law. If your attitude is that the law is this onerous, heavy thing that you can't keep and is a real burden, then you're the son of Hagar, if you will. You're Ishmael. But if your attitude is the law is pleasing, as God would say, it's not too difficult for you, and you do it not out of a sense of obligation, or better yet, not because you think it's necessary or required for your salvation. You do it because you want to. You do it because you desire to please God. In that case, it's not onerous and heavy and bad. So that's what I look at it and see. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that.
It's consistent with what you said.
I would say I'm not, what does salvation mean? I mean, I look at it as, because of the work of Yeshua, you now have this choice. You didn't have that, especially if you're speaking to the house of Israel.
Yep.
They didn't have that choice. The law they were given at that time before Yeshua was the bill of divorce, which is, they didn't have this option.
Yeah.
Because of the salvation of Yeshua, right?
Yep.
You now have the authority to go back into this Torah, this law form that is representative in the heavenly realm,
Yeah.
which is what I'm interested in for sure.
Yeah. And you do it not out of a sense of compulsion or fear. You do it out of a sense of respect and honor. Yeah.
Isn't there another law? It says the law of sin and death.
Yes, that's another interpretation that could also work here.
Well, the law of sin and death was the judge. I mean, I would interpret that to mean, to those who identify as the house of Israel, was the bill of divorce that occurred to them. That was the judgment passed down onto them.
Okay. I don't have a problem with that. That all seems consistent.
Jerry, I'm confused with 425. Why are they making that reference there? I don't get it.
Oh. I cleverly. Let me find it. Sorry about that. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children.
What verse?
That's verse 25 in that passage, Galatians 4:25. I'm not sure that he's trying to draw this analogy, right? He's trying to show that the situation with Sarah and Hagar is like the situation with the Jerusalem that's in heaven versus the Jerusalem that's on earth. And I view that as basically what it's saying is that corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. All the people that are trying to gain God's favor through keeping the law are those. Whereas you don't have to do that. You keep the law because you want to, not because you have to. That's what I was getting anyway. It's a little deep, I'm not sure, but yeah.
Well, the previous verse, he's admitting this is an allegory.
Yes.
This is the King James.
Yes. But it's always confused me. This actually is better than usually I just skipped it because I didn't want to deal with it. So I'm getting better. Yay. There's one more thing I wanted to do before we quit. Now, does everybody know who Ishmael really represents? I mean, what's Ishmael known for these days?
And as far as a nation, identifying as a nation?
Yeah.
Arabia?
Well,
Is that what you mean?
No, I was...
Or attitude or...
Well, no. Ishmael is considered to be the father of Islam, right? Now, Islam would say Muhammad is the guy, right? But they list Ishmael as a prophet. Ishmael's a prophet. And I just for curiosity, I went and I Googled Ishmael and Quran. And the Quran mentions Ishmael a time or two. And there are several, the equivalent of a midrash or the equivalent of a, commentary about Ishmael. And they do consider Ishmael to be the guy that, he's an ancestor, if you will. He's an ancestor of Muhammad. That's the way to put it. He's an ancestor of Muhammad. And so Islamists or Muslims are considered to be ancestors of Muhammad.
They consider Abraham their father.
Yep,
They both
absolutely,
are.
absolutely.
And they mention Jesus in the Quran, apparently.
Absolutely, yeah, using different words. Marvin's got one.
They also think that Ishmael was the chosen son.
Yes. Well,
And
that's kind
the
of
big
what I
thing.
was going to
That's
get
the
at.
big thing about it.
Yep. To me,
But based on what I know about Islam from being in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, which didn't make me an expert, but I got to see some of it in action.
Yep.
They say that that Muhammad started it all. I mean, they may think he's a descendant of Ishmael, but he gets credit for starting the religion, if you want to call it a religion.
Yep. And that's kind of where I was going with this. They also, their stories have Ishmael going to Mecca, where he has some big part in building the Hajj, the Kaaba, the black stone thing. You know, that's because that's a big part of their religion. But the thing that gets me is that we're looking here at this stuff, which is, you know, pretty undeniably 2,500 years old. This writing, this stuff we're looking at in the Bible, 2,500 years old for sure. The writing itself. No, Genesis. Beg your pardon, 3,500 years old. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is, okay, let's give it 3,500 years. The Quran was written in 700 A.D. That's like 4,000 years difference. And yet you're supposed to believe that this 4,000-year newer book is more accurate and has got stuff in it that's to be believed over the 4,000-year older book. That's hard. I mean, it's like comparing apples and oranges almost.
I'm curious what they think of Paul, of
Well,
Muslims.
I don't know. I mean, today's Muslims,
I know
I'm
the
sure.
Jews don't think much. Can't imagine them thinking much of Paul.
Yeah, I was just interested. I was back, if you will. I was back in the thing about Ishmael.
Right.
Ishmael is an important character in Islam. Not terribly important, but somewhat important. And if they really thought he was important, then why don't they read this obviously more accurate and more reliable portrayal of who he was and what he did than the stuff that was written by some guy? Why would you believe the stuff that was written 4,000 years later? That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think the reason they do that, or they believe that, is their parents throughout the ages have did a better job of passing that religion on to their kids than ours did.
Yep.
And they never even considered it.
Yep.
And they've, as far as I know, they've always had the religious police to police it and make sure everybody was in line with it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
It seems like there's always the competition between brothers. Now, it just went on through the ages, just like the Hatfield and McCoys.
Yep.
Although it says that Ishmael's sons, weren't there 12 that became princes?
Yep, and they're named here.
Yeah.
They're named here, and they're not named in the Quran. They're, let's see, what else? And here it says, and he'll be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everybody, and every nation's hand will be against him. So, yeah.
Well, one thing that Muslims can say about Christianity, he tells you to do these basic things. Why don't you at least we're eating clean food, so we can make a better argument than you are. You don't even care about that stuff. So it's easy to, I'll just leave it.
Yeah, okay. I didn't want to go too far. It's just that you need to look at these things in the context in which they were developed, if you will. And this one, to me, is hands down the more reliable because it's the more attested and the older, the more original, yeah.
Well, be careful, John, with the dietary regulations on Islam because they're pretty close to ours.
Yep, I think they probably are.
I was defending Islam that they can make an argument against the vast majority of Christianity that doesn't care about this stuff.
Yes, that's what he was saying. Christians are farther away than the Muslims are.
Well, we consider the scriptures to be sacred and inspired, and
they do too.
What?
They do too. They consider theirs. They consider the Quran to be.
Well, because of what it said about Ishmael's followers, I always had a lower impression. I think maybe that's out of pride, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Look at back there. The Jews had scribes. they taught people Hebrew. They taught the language. So a lot of people are illiterate, I think. They just believe what they're told.
Oh, here.
Among the Muslims.
Well, that's a problem. Well, that's a problem in humanity in general. I don't want to figure this out for myself. Just tell me. Tell me. Skip to the bottom line. I don't want all this stuff. Just tell me what the answer is. We're going to quit. Thank you. This has been a fun discussion. I've enjoyed it. We'll move on next week. See where we end up. Let me pray. Father God, thank you for your Torah. Thank you for these stories. Thank you for the fact that the stories present us an opportunity to discuss things. Thank you that we can relate it to things that have happened in history since then, as well as even today. Bless us as we go through our week, and just cause us to think on these things as in our spare time, and think on your word. Think on the absolute incredibility of the fact that it's sitting here for all of us to read if we just will, and that you'll enlighten us as to what it's there for, what its meaning is, and how you'd like it to modify the way we view you and view our life. Keep us safe until we meet again next week. In Yeshua's name, amen. Thanks very much, and
Amen.
look
Thank you,
forward to
Jerry.
seeing you